Hamas, the terrorist organization that rules Gaza. How did it all begin? Let's go back to 1987. The first Intifada breaks out against Israel, and from within the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, a new, more violent branch is born. Hamas, an acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement. Hamas published its charter calling for killing the Jews, with jihad as its path, refusing peaceful solutions on principle, and swearing to invade Israel and be killed for the sake of Allah. Hamas's first official terrorist attack happened in early 1989, when Hamas kidnapped and killed 2 IDF soldiers, and soon after called for a jihad against the Zionist enemy everywhere. Throughout the 90s, Hamas carried out suicide bombings all over Israel and landed itself on the U.S. State Department's list of designated foreign terrorist organizations. In 2000, the second Intifada began even more violently than the first, and Hamas terrorized Israelis with more suicide bombings, car rammings, kidnappings, and firing rockets into Israel for the first time.
الشعب الفلسطيني بالتأكيد لا يمكن أن يستسلم أمام ذلك.
Hamas also executed Gazans thought to be collaborating with Israel. This 5-year reign of terror left over 1,000 Israelis dead, and as the second Intifada came to an end, Israel tried land for peace. In September 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, and the IDF removed over 9,000 Israelis from their homes throughout the Gaza Strip. This is where Hamas's story really gets started. In January 2006, the Palestinian Legislative Council held elections between Hamas, Fatah, and other smaller parties. Hamas won the majority of the seats, and Ismail Haniyeh became the leader of Gaza. Shortly after, Hamas infiltrated Israel through a cross-border tunnel and kidnapped IDF soldier Gilad Shalit while killing 2 others. Meanwhile, the Hamas and Fatah unity government was unraveling with a 1.5 years of bloody internal clashes. The violence culminated in June 2007 when Hamas infamously threw Fatah members off rooftops and carried out a complete military takeover of Gaza. Since June 15, 2007, Hamas has controlled every aspect of government and life in Gaza, and there have been no elections since. In 2011, Hamas released Gilad Shalit after 5 years in captivity in a deal that released 1,027 convicted terrorists from Israel. Yahya Sinwar, known as the Butcher of Khan Yunis, returned to Gaza and eventually became Hamas's new official leader. In the summer of 2014, Hamas members kidnapped and murdered 3 Israeli teen boys, launching a nearly 2-month-long war. During Israel's Operation Protective Edge, Hamas fired 4,500 rockets at Israel, the IDF destroyed 32 Hamas tunnels, and Hamas violated several official ceasefires before the end of the war. In 2018, Hamas launched the Great March of Return and incited weekly riots at the security fence between Gaza and Israel in attempts to breach it and invade Israel en masse, foreshadowing what was to come in 2023. During that time, Hamas also came up with new ways to terrorize Israel. They tied explosives to balloons and kites to float into Israel, scorching and destroying thousands of acres of land across southern Israel. These violent riots and arson attacks lasted almost 2 years, peaking in May 2019, when the U.S. moved its embassy to Jerusalem. The next major escalation came in May 2021, when Hamas launched barrages of rockets towards Jerusalem, sparking Operation Guardian of the Walls. Hamas and Islamic Jihad fired nearly as many rockets at Israel in just 12 days as they had over the span of 2 months in 2014. 2 years later, Hamas carried out the attack that would become the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. On October 7th, 2023, thousands of Hamas terrorists broke through the border and invaded Israel, massacring over 1,200 Israelis, most of them civilians, while simultaneously firing thousands of rockets all across Israel. Hamas took hostage about 240 children, women, men, elderly civilians, and foreign nationals.
ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثاني وثالث ورابعة لأنه إحنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات.
Those comments by that Hamas official that you just saw at the end of that very well done video summarizing who is Hamas, those comments, folks, take note. He declared that we will duplicate October 7th. That is our goal, and that's exactly what Hamas will do if it is left alive to fight another day. I don't know about you, but in watching that video, my first thought was this movement, this demonic, evil movement must be crushed. It must not be allowed to fight another day, to live on. It must be crushed. There's no other alternative for Israel. This is an existential threat. And yet, we have many in the West calling for Israel to agree to a premature ceasefire. We even saw recently the prime ministers of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand issue a joint statement calling, yes, for Israel to essentially lay down its arms and agree to a ceasefire that will leave Hamas alive and kicking and with every intention of carrying out more October 7th. I think that's a non-starter. I believe Israel's political and military leadership believes that as well. But joining us now to break it down, why this would be such a mistake, and to give us an idea of where Israel is heading in 2024 is our good friend Rabbi Pesach Wolicki of Israel365action.com. He's also host of the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast. Pesach, always great to have you with us. And last time you were here, we still have people talking about your last appearance on Israel Under Fire. It's great to have you back. Okay, we're talking about this ceasefire. And by the way, you have sons serving right now, fighting Hamas, who are in the Israel Defense Forces, many members of your family. We want to ask you about that as well and a status update on them. We've been praying for them since our viewers last saw you here on the show. The ceasefire talk. Simple question, why is it so disastrous?
You know, as you just said, if Hamas lives to fight another day, they're going to try to do this again. But a lot of people think, well, you've already inflicted so much damage to Hamas. Are they really a threat? Is there really still an existential threat to Israel? And people who say that are missing the big picture. See, Hamas, as you pointed out, is the governing force of the Gaza Strip. Yeah. And that means that they're the ones educating these children. The reason that people can do this, the reason that you have, even after October 7th, over 75% of the Gazans supportive of what Hamas did, is when you have decades of education where children are taught from the youngest age that it is a sacred act, it is a holy act, it is a godly act to murder and rape and destroy Jewish people, you can't leave them in power. Because all it means is that, you know, it's like pulling out weeds. If you don't get it to the root, it's going to grow back. But it's much deeper than that. One of the questions in people's minds is, how do you defeat an ideology? How do you defeat an evil ideology? How do you bring peace? Well, we actually have two examples of that in the 20th century, Eric. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. These were two evil, evil societies. They weren't just evil regimes, but they had populations that largely supported those evil ideologies. How did they get defeated? How come both Germany and Japan became peaceful, rather benign, somewhat Western societies? What happened? The answer is unequivocal defeat.
Yes.
And that's a tough pill for people to swallow, to understand that the way you break an evil ideology, the way you make sure that it actually is eradicated and people have a change of heart, is by delivering a defeat that is so unequivocal that the people recognize that their own ideology was defeated. Israel must get rid of Hamas, because when people call for ceasefire, what does ceasefire mean to you? Does it mean that Hamas is still governing the Gaza Strip? Does it mean that they're still teaching genocidal ideology? Does it mean that their charter still calls for the death of all Jews in the world? If it means a change of all those things, then we're not talking about Hamas anymore. It is unacceptable to leave Hamas in place and expect us to have any peace in that region at all.
No, it must be utter defeat. And you lay out a stunning statistic, Pesach. Polls have showed not only the great support for Hamas in the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland, but also in Gaza. Still, in the wake of October 7th, some 75% of Gazans, polls show, support Hamas. And yet, the Biden administration is really promoting the idea of a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians, even in the wake of October 7th. What are your thoughts on that? And is there any form of support whatsoever in Israel right now for a potential two-state solution?
Well, let's start with that question. The support in September 2023, I don't think they knew October 7th was coming, but Pew Research Center did a poll of Israelis. 65% of Israelis, and if you know anything about political polling, That's an absolute landslide. 65% of Israelis, including 59% of Arab Israelis, oppose a two-state solution. And 75% of what we call the Palestinians, the Palestinian Arabs, the Arabs in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, also oppose a two-state solution. So you're talking about a quote-unquote solution that no one on either side supports. No one wants a two-state solution. Now, we don't want a two-state solution for different reasons. Israel wants a one-state solution that includes an Arab minority that has full rights and lives peacefully among Israel, just like our Arab Israeli citizens do. And the Palestinians want a one-state solution that includes no Jews. But a two-state solution, so first of all, it's something that nobody wants, and it's the height of arrogance by the Biden administration and other Western voices calling for a solution that no one in the conflict actually is looking for.
Yeah, you get a sense that they're dictating to Israel, but Israel is a sovereign nation that can make its own decisions.
And Israel will make its own decisions. So first of all, it's the height of arrogance, but also more to the problem of a two-state solution. People, you stop the average person in the street and you say, are you in favor of a two-state solution? They say, yeah, sure, it sounds nice. Two states, two peoples, that's it. Everyone's happy. It's a solution. Two's a nice number. That's how people think about a two-state solution. But if you just drill down a little bit and you realize how absurd it is, who would be governing this Palestinian state? According to Biden, it would be Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah, what's known as the Palestinian Authority. What's the problem with that? Well, we have a few problems. First of all, that's an administration that also preaches genocide against the Jews. Abbas himself is a Holocaust denier. The Palestinian Authority famously pays stipends in what we call the pay-to-slay program to terrorist families. There's also been information that's come out that there were Fatah terrorists from the Palestinian Authority faction that Abbas leads who participated in October 7th. The idea that Abbas would govern the Gaza Strip or be the head of any kind of state is absurd, but let's go a little further. Mahmoud Abbas was elected to a four-year term in 2006. There has not been an election since, and the reason there hasn't been an election is that polling shows that if there were a free and fair election, a democratic election in the Arab territories, the Gaza Strip, what we call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, that Hamas would win overwhelmingly. Yeah. Abbas is polling right now at about 14%. So are we talking about a democratic Palestinian state? Those who call for a two-state solution, all the questions we need to ask them is, who's governing it? Yeah. Do you want it to be a democracy? Is it a state that would advocate peaceful relations with Israel?
Is it demilitarized?
Is it demilitarized? On all of these questions, these are things that the man in the street asked if they like a two-state solution, has never thought about. And once you ask those questions, you realize that the concept is absurd. It would pose a major national security threat to Israel. But more from a moral perspective, should the result of the October 7th massacre be that we reward these people with a state? That should be, is that why my children are laying their lives on the line?
And I'm going to ask you, last question, Pesach, and just great breakdown on everything. We thank you for it. Tell us about your family right now, how we can pray for your family, and do you sense a biblical, a spiritual awakening in Israel, among the people of Israel, since October 7th, as evil as it was, obviously, a black mark on the history of the state of Israel? Could some good come out of it in terms of a turning of the hearts of the people to the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?
So let me start with my family. Thank you so much for asking, Eric. And the fact that you and so many others in the Christian world are praying for my children means so much. And I'm one person and I'm one family, but I also want to add that the Jewish world is waking up to the fact, since October 7th, when they look around the world and they see so many people who we thought were our friends who are not our friends, but the Jewish world is waking up to the fact that the one group of people who are steadfast friends with Israel, who are truly standing with Israel, is the Christian world. I believe that the Christian-Jewish relationship has taken leaps forward as a result of this war, because Jews are waking up to who our friends really are. And so thank you for asking about my family. My children, I have two children who are reservists who are currently on leave because they've scaled back some of the reserve duty. So last time I was here, I had three of my children and my son-in-law who were in combat units, but 2 of my kids are out. But my son, who's enlisted, who's been in since October 7th. He had not come home since October 7th. He actually came home today, right before we went on to sit in the studio, right before we went on the air. I got a message from home that he was released for 1 day to come home. I'm going to miss him because I'm here with you, but that's okay. But he's going to go right back into the fighting. And then I have a son-in-law who's an officer in a combat unit who's also still there in the fighting. In terms of a spiritual awakening, I believe the answer is yes. We see it. First of all, people in America need to understand that the stereotype you have in the U.S. that older people tend to lean more conservative and younger people are more left-wing is flipped on its head in Israel. In Israel, the stereotype of a left-wing liberal is that they're old. Younger people are more faithful. Younger people are more conservative. Younger people tend to be more right-wing. Yeah. So there's been a slow spiritual revival happening in Israel for a few decades. October 7th has certainly ramped that up. A lot of illusions that people had, people on the left or people who were more secular were shattered, thankfully, on October 7th. And there's a sense of spiritual purpose and a strength of Jewish identity and a tapping into Jewish history that has really taken hold of the population in Israel. I pray that it continues. But the most important revival that I'm seeing is what's happening around the world. How biblical is this, Eric? Worldwide today, there is a struggle session going on, a debate, as it were, if it were more polite, about what is good and what is evil. 2 conceptions of good and evil. And the whole world is breaking down into these 2 camps. But what is good and what is evil? And it all revolves around the nation of Israel in the land of Israel. That's the big debate. If I told you, imagine it was a few hundred years ago and someone said there will be a time in history where the whole world will be breaking down into 2 camps with 2 radically different conceptions of morality, of the definition of good and evil. And the focus of that debate will be a conflict between the nation of Israel and its enemies. Isn't that what God wants? Isn't it the way it's supposed to be? So yeah, it's tough. It's tough being where we are. It's tough being in the eye of the storm and being on the front lines fighting the evil that seeks to take down the entire Western civilization with its biblical Judeo-Christian underpinnings. Yes, we're on the front lines and it's tough and it's bloody and it's painful. In my own synagogue, we've already buried a number of children who have died in the front lines, good friends of mine's children. I pray for my children every day. We're on the front lines, but there's nowhere I'd rather be. There's nowhere I'd rather be, Eric.
That's right. And as you said, Pesach, there are no gray areas here. This is good versus evil. I believe we serve a God who is very black and white. It's good and it's evil. And just a reminder, Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey, and yet the world's ire and its obsession is on this tiny nation called Israel. Last question. Hey, when I have you here in the States in studio, I have to take advantage. Come on. Last question. As we move into 2024, prophetically, you see these prophetic chess pieces continuing to move on the board. We have about a minute left.
Look, can I get political? You know, Eric, the way the Biden administration is behaving, the way they empowered Iran over the last few years, trying to re-enter the Iran deal, giving them facilitating funding, the way the Biden administration has allied itself strategically with Qatar, who's a mortal enemy of Israel, who funds terrorism. And when we look back at the Donald Trump policies, moving the embassy to Jerusalem as a show of strength, which also revealed to the world that showing strength leads to peace. Remember, the Abraham Accords happened after the embassy move, not before it. Yeah. And all those shows of strength, rewarding Israel and its friends and punishing Israel's enemies, and then we have the Biden administration doing the reverse. I know I'm getting a little political on your show here, but when I say, what do I see spiritually on the horizon? I see that the Western world has to rediscover what the generation that fought the Nazis in Imperial Japan knew, which was that when evil rears its ugly head, it is the responsibility of good people to sacrifice to destroy it. And that's a clarity that, to a large extent, we've lost, and we must regain it.
These are the times, Pesach. We live in Bible times, prophetic times. Thank you for your breakdown, my friend.